thankful for the way these stories hold on to the lifetime we won't get back. I know these rivers carry on. People tend to stick to you after time. Places tend to do the same as we do. This river carries on and on.
Hello and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake Lamore, and if you like the sound of my voice, it's because I'm using this magnificent microphone from King Music. It's a PreSonus PD70, and it's absolutely incredible for any type of vocal performances that you want to capture. And the cool thing is you can get this for a very decent price at King Music with a discount code from Kankakee Podcast. If you go to kingmusic.com and you click on that PreSonus PD70 microphone and then put the promo code in, Kankakee Pod is the promo code. You put that in and you get 10% off your order. So keep that in mind, kingmusic.com, and use that promo code Kankakee Pod. This is our monthly episode with the Kankakee County Museum, where we get into something historical from our rich history in Kankakee County, and we're joined by Jack Klasey. Hi, Jack.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I keep forgetting it's a morning. It's been a long morning. But it's great to always.
And somebody may be listening to this podcast at midnight or 3 in the morning.
It's very true. Yeah. So just a good day, I guess, is the. But yeah, we're recording this in the morning. Jack, it's always great to have you here. You're on the board of the Kankakee County Historical Society. You also write a weekly column in the Daily Journal. You're an author. You do everything. And so it's always an honor and a privilege to sit down with you. And before we get deep into our topic today, I just want to point out some really great things that are happening at the museum. I'm really excited about this one, Jack. The Geological Story of Kankakee. That's a lecture that's coming up at the museum on Sunday, October 8th. So if you're listening to this before October 8th, you can go. It's at 1 p.m. and you can learn about the geological history and formation of Kankakee by Abigail Davis, who is a geology enthusiast. She's also a museum volunteer as well.
Should be a fascinating program. We learn all about limestone and not just the township, but that rock.
Yeah, we're going to learn about the rock that makes our area so beautiful in so many different ways. It's not just the natural way we find it at parks and things like that, but it's also so many of our historic buildings are made from the limestone from this county. So
I just walk through the downtown area and look at some of the churches and just the different places. The Stone Barn, our museum downtown.
I was just going to say that the French Heritage Museum,
from the 1860s, and that is that's one of the oldest buildings downtown.
Yeah,
I think the Methodist Church are both 1850s era or 1860s and 70s era limestone buildings, and they're beautiful. The library, the back portion of with the old library.
The old library,
yes. Now the city administration building. So there's so many wonderful buildings and so much geological history that is interesting.
And then another event that's coming up a little ahead of time in November, on November 5th, is the Artisan Fair that takes place at the Kankakee County Museum. Lots of fine arts and crafts. That's from 9 to 3 on November 5th. And if you want to find out anything that's happening at the museum, go to KankakeeCountyMuseum.com. Also Facebook and Instagram at Kankakee County Museum. And you could just go visit the museum at your leisure, the Kankakee County Museum, and then also the French Heritage Museum, which will be closing soon for the season.
Correct.
Give you a heads up on that. There's not too many Saturdays left.
End of October, I think, but I'm not quite sure on that, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's usually sometime in the fall. So take advantage of that. Open every Saturday. So, Jack, what are we talking about today, Jack?
We're talking about the Great Interstate Fair, which was, during its heyday, one of the largest events in the state of Illinois. In fact, it drew more people than any other fair in the state, with the exception of the state fair. It drew people from surrounding states all over the place to Kankakee.
So it was the state fair, and then the interstate fair was just right under there.
Yeah, and it was part of the long history of fairs in Kankakee County. If we go back all the way to 1856, which was 3 years after the county was founded, there was a county fair held in Cobb's Woods, which today you would know as the Riverview section of Kankakee, roughly near Cobb Park. I think the newspaper at the time referred to it as the Farmer's Picnic.
That's funny.
Anyway, then through the years, various other fairs were held. Right after the Civil War, for example, they found a permanent home for the county fair, at least permanent at that time, in the fairgrounds west of Mound Grove Cemetery, along what's now Fair Street. That was right after the Civil War, and so the county fair moved there and grew rather well over the years. From 1902 to 1911, it was known as the District Fair, the Kankakee District Fair, and it was interesting how much of an area it covered. It drew people sort of officially from Kankakee, Will, Iroquois, Grundy, Livingston, and Ford counties in Illinois.
Was that just kind of the reason why they called it a district fair? Because it wasn't just Kankakee County, it was all the neighboring counties as well. So they're just like, let's call it a district fair.
Right. I think that actually, for example, the competitions and so forth for the blue ribbons and that sort of thing, you could enter from any of those counties, and even from Lake and Newton County in Indiana. And it was a pretty big deal, roughly 1902 to 1911. And that represented a renaissance in the fair. In the late 1800s, early 1890s, it had been kind of dying out, not very popular, but a group of young farmers and businessmen and so forth in Kankakee, including Len Small, who was then a young politician. He was a very active farmer, horticulturist in Illinois, in Kankakee.
But why do you think it was dying out, though? Not to interrupt you, but
I think there was some disagreement, among other things, between the horsemen and the other farm interests. There was some questions about racing and so forth, and eventually what happened is for a while, the horse racing interests, and these were sulky racers, not horseback racers. I forget what they call it.
A horse racing where no one's riding? Is that
right? They're riding in a cart behind.
They're riding in a cart behind.
I can't think of the proper name for the.
Yeah, shoot, it escapes my mind too. So that's like the old. Wait, you think of Romans, right? Is that the
chariot racing?
Chariot racing, yeah, kind of like that. Yeah,
I can't remember what the name. But anyway, speaking of whatever it was, the horsemen's group founded their own racetrack. And they built a unique racetrack. It was figure 8 shaped, and it was over roughly in what is now Hobby Heights in Kankakee, and the east end of Court Street, about just west of what would be Marycrest subdivision. And it, for a number of years, it was the main racetrack in the area. Even drew people from around the country because it was a very unusual formation. It did spawn several others of the same kind of thing. The fair in the late 1890s began to be revitalized. They increased the amount of money they put into prizes and so forth. They started bringing more outside activities like entertainment type of things into the fairgrounds.
So that's kind of when the fair became more than just showing off animals and the things you would grow and horse races. Yeah. So it was more like, okay, what can we do to get people through the gate, right?
Exactly.
And entertainment.
And one of the things they did, in 1899, they built a new, much larger grandstand because, again, they were doing activities like entertainment type of things, equestrian acts and circus-type acts and racing of various kinds. And another oddity, in 1899, there were actually 2 fairs at the same time. One of them was, of course, the District Fair, and the other was the Merchant Street Fair of 1899, which was a really big deal. They drew hundreds, maybe even thousands of people downtown, and it was held the same week as the county fair. And there were booths and, entertainment all downtown that time. It was actually pretty well attended, both that and the county fair at that time. And they talked about doing a Merchant Street Fair in succeeding years, but it never came about.
So that was just a one-time deal.
That was a one-time deal, yeah.
You wrote an article on that
I did,
recently.
yes.
Maybe that's what it was.
A couple weeks ago.
Okay, yeah. So if you want to look through the Daily Journal's archives, you can read the article and see the pictures from it are really incredible.
Yeah, very interesting. Huge. The floats, of course, were big farm wagons were hauled by horses.
Yeah.
and there was we have a really good photo of the Queen's float with all of her attendants. They were all pretty fancily dressed. A big timepiece. One of the jewelers in town had I guess it was a mocked up pocket watch that was like 6 feet in diameter, and they
wasn't Volkmann, was it?
It was. It was Volkmann. Volkmann and something at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, became, of course, the leading jeweler for many years here. Anyway, the Interstate Fair was held for the first time. They changed the name and so forth in 1911. And it got to be a pretty big thing. They brought in acts from all over the country. The grandstand.
And this was being held where again? This one?
This was being held in the same spot that the District Fair had been.
Okay.
And today it's called Old Fair Park.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
It was a good sized land. Originally, I think when it was a District Fair, they had like 15 acres and so forth, but it grew to much more than that. I don't know quite how many, but it seems to me it was maybe close to 100 acres by the time they were done, because they had an even larger grandstand eventually there. The grandstand that was built for the 1899 fair burned on July 21st, 1921. It was at that time the largest grandstand in the state. It was 500 feet long. And I don't know how many people that would hold, but it would be definitely in the thousands. After that fire, they were going to build a temporary grandstand, because this happened like 25 days before the fair was supposed to open.
Oh, my gosh.
And it was a total loss. I mean, it just was old wood that just burned down like easily. So they talked about it, and they had pretty brave statements. Oh, we're going to rebuild. Use a temporary grandstand of some sort. But then the more they thought about it, they thought, we'd be better off just canceling for this year and building a proper grandstand. And they built an even larger one.
Got to build for the future.
Oh, yeah. In the early days of the fairs, not the early days there, but it's the late 1800s, early 1900s, especially early 1900s, you began to see the effects of aviation. And I think it was in 1901 or 1902, there was a balloon ascension, a woman balloon ascension, and she ascended into the heavens and I believe parachuted down.
That happened here in Kankakee at one of the fairs.
Oh, yeah. That was not an uncommon thing. There was a man named Nels Anderson from Shabance, I believe, or Clifton, who in the early 1900s did that sort of an act, went around to all the little county fairs and town celebrations and so forth, and he would ride up in his hot air balloons, often with his little dog, and reach a certain point and just parachute down.
Now, somebody would still be in the balloon, right? Or how would the balloon?
No, it just was, it would deflate.
Oh, okay.
I think he probably had a ripstop or something where he could open it and let the hot air out so it would come down so they could retrieve it, obviously.
Right.
Didn't want to chase it all the way across the county. But there are very strange things happen around fairs.
Well, that was kind of just America, and I don't know, maybe the whole world, but specifically America. I know it was right around that time in the early 1900s when a lot of those crazy stunts were happening. People were climbing buildings and
going over Niagara Falls in a barrel.
Yeah, all those crazy things. So that, that was probably our version of it here, right? I mean, was going up on a hot air balloon and going down in a parachute.
Going back to the fairs again, aviation, and I don't have the year at hand, but I think it was somewhere around 1911 maybe 1912, the first year of the 1911, 1912, first year of the Interstate Fair, the Moisant Aviation Company came to town with 2 or 3 of their biplanes and a couple of daring young men on flying aircraft doing acrobatics over the fair and so forth. And even although she did not fly at that particular one, the young lady who was the second woman in the United States to earn a pilot's license. And she was one of the Moisant family. She's one of the sisters. Moisants were from here, actually from Manteno. The John Moisant, who was the head of the aviation company, who ended up dying in an aircraft crash at New Orleans. And for many years, the major airport at New Orleans was Moisant Field. It later became Louis Armstrong.
Okay.
Yes, Louis Armstrong Field. But anyway, the Moisants had grown up in a farm in Manteno and somehow got into the aviation business, and they did fairs all over the country. They actually at one point had and this is out east, they had a training school for pilots. The young lady who was the second pilot, a woman pilot in the country, was one of the daughter of that family. And then later, of course, they had quite a few different aircraft exhibits. And through the years, we have in the museum collection, we have an aerial photo taken of the fairgrounds in probably the teens, 19, 17, 18, somewhere in there. And there are either 2 or 3 biplanes parked in the infield in front of the big. You can see the big racetrack and the grandstand, and a couple of aircraft parked there, along with hundreds or maybe thousands of autos just just north of the fairgrounds. They had a big parking area. And of course, by about the 1920s, you had a lot of cars on the road.
A lot of people were driving at that point. They could afford their own. And it would be, at that time, it would just be amazing to watch a plane go in circles like that. And just amazing to see a plane in general in the teens. Right. Just because they were still such a new thing.
That's right.
Did they offer rides to civilians, or was it just mere amusement watching them do their spins?
I think at that fair it was strictly an entertainment type of thing.
Okay.
The Interstate Fair, getting back there again, I guess. I keep getting distracted, but I hope people...
there's so many stories that there's so many different aspects of the fair that lead into it.
The main entrance to the fair was on the north side of what's now Fair Street, directly across from where Harrison Avenue ends. And they had a big arch, a ticket gate that you went in, and we have a number of pictures of those. And that arch was finally torn down in, I think, about the 1950s. It had been, decaying for years, but it was quite an event. There were, of course, many buildings at the fairgrounds. You not only had the huge grandstand and the infield where things were going on, but you had a horticultural building and you had an agriculture building, and there were various exhibits that could be seen. And of course, there was a midway. You had behind the grandstand, there was a midway with all kinds of attractions, including hoochie hoochie dancers and Radicke beer tent. And there was a little Ferris wheel I remember seeing on one of the pictures that we have. And just any number of things. We have photographs, again, of crowds surging down this midway. Auto racing was fairly popular, in fact.
When did that start coming into the Interstate Fair? Was it in the teens, or was it not until like the 20s?
I think it was probably in the late teens, perhaps, because by that time there was a pretty significant number of vehicles around. Actually, the first auto race in Kankakee, I think, was 1910. Let me check and see here.
That's earlier.
October 12th, 1910 was... they had a race that was at the fairgrounds, and I don't remember how many people we had, but there was a $200 purse and so forth, and it was
That's a lot of money.
that's a lot of money at that
back
time.
then, yeah.
One of the prominent racers in town was a man named George Fortin, and George Fortin's garage, he owned a garage and a car dealership. He was the Buick Overland Franklin, I think, several of in the 20s at least, different places. He had been injured in a crash in a race in Joliet the week before, so he was not in the one in Kankakee.
I'm amazed they had him that early, 1910. Yeah. I would think it would be a little later than that. But so by the teens, though, the 19.
Oh yeah.
They started to have the auto races
on the track
at the fair, right?
At the fair, right?
Okay.
The fair was a big showcase, especially in the 20s for Len Small, of course, because he was busy running for governor and was elected governor.
It was really time for him to shine.
Yes, he did.
Show off.
And so we have many photographs in our collection of the governor with various people at various events around even, for example, Uncle Joe Cannon, who was a U.S. representative from Danville, very powerful man. He was, many years, was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He would turn up with the Governor Small, of course, and Big Bill Thompson, the mayor of Chicago, would turn up in photographs along with him. And so there was a great big... Coming to the fair was a lot easier in the 20s than it had been earlier than that, and in the 30s, mainly because of the fact that by the late 1920s, Illinois had the largest number of paved roads in the state in the country. Again, coming back to Len Small, that was his big thing, and he ran for governor as pulling Illinois out of the mud. And hundreds of miles a year of roads were paved, and eventually thousands of miles were paved. So it made it easy to get to places like the Kankakee Interstate Fair, or from Chicago to Rockford, or and so forth. There was also, people came to the fair on the railroads. In that period, the railroads were still big business. You had, maybe 50 trains a day going through Kankakee one way or another between the various. And so people would come from Chicago, they would come from Southern Illinois or Iowa or
because at that time, how many different lines were running through?
You had two stations anyway. You had the IC, of course, downtown, and the Big Four station up on the north side. After a while, you had the 3I station as well, which eventually burned down. But so you had at least three major lines, plus there were a lot of little short-haul lines like Kankakee and Seneca and so forth, but people would come to events in Chicago or even commute. The railroads also frequently would run excursion fairs for groups. American Association of Brewery Workers or something out of Chicago might have a big group thing with 500 people that they were bringing down to something in Kankakee.
And it might be the Interstate Fair.
It might be the Interstate Fair, and frequently was. Of course, there were special ticket rates sometimes, too, for things like the fair. If you were going to go to the fair, you could get an excursion rate of some sort.
And once again, with the Interstate Fair, are there several counties feeding into this fair?
I think the district fair idea just sort of, I don't know if it was carried over or not, but officially the Interstate Fair, I guess, was not technically a Kankakee Fair. It just happened to be located in Kankakee.
Okay.
But it was open. And I don't know, again, about the competitions, for best butter and that sort of thing.
I just wasn't sure if it was exclusive like Kankakee County, or if the name Interstate lent itself to kind of being open to anyone that could.
So. Probably so. You could enter from anywhere. And I think, too, in the late 20s or the 20s and the early 30s, possibly the county fair aspect of it, the agricultural competitions, took a real back seat to the entertainment activities. I mean, there were circus acts. Again, looking at pictures we have trapeze artists flying out around there, and equestrians standing on the backs of horses and this sort of thing. The Interstate Fair, they missed the 1922 event because of the grandstand burned down. But when they did come back, had huge crowds packing the seats in that big new grandstand. The fair only lasted another 10 years after that, though. The 1931 fair, actually the 1932 fair, was huge. I mean, there's a lot of promotional material. They brought huge numbers of people in, a lot of great acts and so forth. And it looked like, boy, this is going to go on forever. But then, unfortunately, somebody realized that there was a big competition going on the next year. In Chicago, they were holding the Century of Progress exposition in 1933, which was, of course, a World's Fair and was guaranteed to draw millions of people. Originally, there was an idea that maybe that would really benefit Kankakee because people would be staying in hotels here to be able to get in, and maybe it did to some extent. But the fair authorities, or the fair board, whatever, I think finally examined this as, I don't think we're going to be able to compete with these people up there. We're going to pull all of our visitors away, and we've got all these big investment. If we're going to be bringing in acts and paying a lot of money, if we could even get them, because they're going to be booked elsewhere. So they said, nope, okay, 1932, no fair.
Or 1933, right?
Yeah, no 1933 fair. And yeah. I think one of the other factors was, of course, 1932 was in the depth of the Depression. So people didn't have a lot of money to spend. And if they were going to spend it, they were going to go to the World's Fair, probably. Well, the expectation, of course, was that the Interstate Fair would be revived in 34, but it wasn't. That, and for a number of following years, fairs reverted back. Well, there was a number of years where there was no fair at all, but then it reverted back to the original model of a relatively small county fair, drawing mostly local people with, local agricultural events and some things. And the site, some of the fairs continued to be held at what's now Old Fair Park. Others were some of the other places, I think, along the Riverview area and so forth. Again, they were relatively small time.
They just kind of went wherever they could from.
I think so, wherever they could find space and so forth. But late 1930s and into the 40s, they held in various spots and were kind of a relatively small thing. But the fair board still existed, of course, and they said, we really need a better location, a permanent home for the Kankakee County Fair, and we think it could be a bigger event than it is with this sort of wandering things. So they bought 168 acres south of Kankakee, a farm there, and I've forgotten the name of the farmer. But in 1948, in a 2-day period from June 26th and 27th, they blitzed the place. They had 250 volunteers. They had donated construction equipment, and they essentially built a fairgrounds in 2 days, although mostly it was, under canvas for that first year. But they had a partial grandstand for events. They had a track. They had places to hold the judging and so forth. And then over the next several years, they built up the fairgrounds that we see today that has, a large competitive track for racing and other events, a nice-sized grandstand, a midway, and exhibition halls for the different events of the fair. So the fair still is essentially local, but I think it does draw people from around surrounding counties as well.
And even some of the acts for entertainment that they bring to the Kankakee County Fair to this day will be from far away.
Oh, yes.
I know one year they had a motocross act. I think they were twin brothers, and they tour county fairs all over the country. And they were from somewhere out west, I think. So, just an example.
Evel Knievel and his brother.
I wish I could remember their names off the top of my head. But yeah, they still kind of hold true going back to those interstate fair routes a little bit.
Yeah, I think that fairs are still really a viable sort of thing, because I think that a lot of people, even though we're still a very agricultural county, but a lot of the younger people especially are more urban oriented. but they still go to things like the fair because, hey, this is something cool to do.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
And,
it's something cool to do. It's something different. It helps us kind of get back to our roots. They may like the urban lifestyle, but maybe they want to, soak in the rural lifestyle for a minute.
Cotton candy and a,
corn dog
and a corn dog and a deep fried banana or something.
But yeah, something deep fried. There's always some interesting deep fried things.
There's actually surprising number of things going on. I just happened to notice a posting that Bill Yonka did on Facebook the other day, and he was talking about last weekend and how many events were going on in Kankakee and the surrounding areas. He said, used to be people complained there's nothing to do here. He said, look at this list.
Some of them still complain about it, but yeah, there's something always going on, and it is amazing that the Kankakee County Fairgrounds is actually. They have several events that happen there throughout the year that aren't the fair.
Oh, yeah.
One of them is the Lay Artisans Arts and Crafts Fair.
That's right, the Bourbonnais
Grove Historical Society. That's a big thing they do out there.
And they have, I think, gun and knife shows.
They have those shows. I know there was a guitar show out there this last summer. There's all kinds of, sometimes they have a reptile show that comes through there.
And I think actually they even rent out for wedding receptions and things like that. So.
Yeah, you can have a wedding out there.
Yeah, it's a nicely maintained fairgrounds.
Yeah, I agree. So there's always, it's nice to have that facility to host those different events that are going on.
So you look at it and we really have a continuing connection all the way back to 1856 that there's been a fair of some sort in most of the time in Kankakee County, and it still lives on.
And now you know why Old Fair Park is called Old Fair Park.
That's correct.
Because that's where the fair used to be.
This has been an interesting excursion. We have been all over the map on this.
Well, I think this happens almost every time just because there's so many pieces to it. But we just encourage everyone, as always, to check out the Kankakee County Museum. Go explore. It's just amazing. Every time I go in there, I learn something new because there's so many things to see. Realistically, some of us don't have enough time to read each individual plaque or things like that, or maybe spend enough time in a certain exhibit. So you kind of do it in multiple trips. Unless you've got absolutely nothing to do for a long period of time, which I feel like most of us don't have that leisure. It takes you multiple trips to soak in everything that's at the museum.
We always like to see, young people, and I'm speaking of kids. They're coming in with their family or with a school group and so forth because we think that this is going to be their first introduction, and we hope they keep coming back. For example, a week from Friday, on the 30th of September, we have our semi-annual History Day, in which we bring in fifth graders from all different schools in the county, and they come and we have people in the different various exhibits to talk about what's going on, like our sports exhibit, or we sometimes have had I know Phil Angelo always does a thing on the Civil War, and he's an excellent Civil War historian. He does a really good presentation on Civil War. Gets the kids involved. He gets them marching, all kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll have, I think, some reenactors, perhaps. I'm not sure if they are this year, but some years we do. We do this every other year. And we have a teacher in the schoolhouse, of course, and the kids can actually sit down at the desks. And the interesting thing, of course, that many of them don't realize is that the old one-room schoolhouses like that had all 6 or 8 grades in the same room, and they had desk sizes to suit.
Yeah.
There's a variety of desk sizes in that building for something suitable for the kindergarten or the first grader or for the 8th grader.
Yeah. The little desks up to the big ones. Well, Jack, thank you so much again for your time and educating us on the Interstate Fair. And once again, KankakeeCountyMuseum.com is a great place to start. Facebook and Instagram, both of those are at Kankakee County Museum. If you're listening to this before October 8th and you want to learn about the geology side of, and when we say geology, we don't mean genealogy. There's just that slight difference there. There's the slight different spelling, but geology is the study of rocks. And so there's going to be a presentation on that October 8th at the Kankakee County Museum campus. And then also coming up, the Artisan Fair is November 5th.
And this fair has no racing involved.
What's that?
I said this fair has no race cars involved.
No, there's no race. Right, there's no racing, horse racing.
A lot of really great ideas for Christmas gifts, though, because of beautifully handcrafted materials from a number of vendors. It's very worthwhile going to.
Yeah, and then before you know it, we'll be talking about the Gallery of Trees. That'll be a thing as well. So, but yeah, KankakeeCountyMuseum.com for all those things. Thanks again, Jack.
Well, thank you again for having me here. I always enjoy our sessions, Jake.
Yes, me too. It's always a great time. Well, that concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake Lamore. Thank you so much for listening. Please share this podcast with a family member, friend, or neighbor that you think might enjoy learning new things about the people and places of Kankakee County. Also, a special thank you to our patrons for helping make this episode possible, including Karen Bishop, James Reardon, Jake Lee, Jesse Arsenal, Dave Barron, Daryl Damper, Samantha Rocknowski, Lake Iverson, Travis Garcia, Jane Bostwick, Dawn Harrison, Simon Topless, Scott Wright, Carrie O'Connell, Jamie Race, Joanne Berry, Anthony Vicelli, Eric Olson, Jeff and Rosa Carroll, Teague Dreenan, Sandy and Steve Twait, and Rose Lucky. To become a podcast patron, go to KankakeePodcast.com and then just click on the Patron tab. If you pledge $5 or more per month, you'll also hear your name announced on an episode. There's also other rewards like early access to new episodes, unedited versions of episodes, even video versions of select episodes, podcast merch, discounts on special events, and so much more. Your monthly pledge is truly appreciated. Our monthly goal right now is to reach $400 per month. And right now, we're about 37% away from reaching that goal. So please sign up for the patron program today at KankakeePodcast.com. Our theme song is by Lupe Carroll.